Adolescence is a standout show that arrived onto Netflix a couple of weeks ago and has soared in popularity and importance ever since. It's been crafted in an unconventional way that challenges our usual viewing habits and tackles issues that media has struggled to tackle before. The show has had a huge boost of recommendations via word of mouth, which is something you can't buy, and it's even encouraged the UK Prime Minister to get involved in taking action around the issues at its core. So how did this show manage to make such an impact across backgrounds, across ages, and across the world? Today I'm diving into what made Adolescence a must-watch show in an unconventional way. This video is going to be spoiler heavy for Adolescence, so if you intend to watch the show and you haven't seen it all yet, go and do that before you proceed. The first aspect of the show's power is the story. Across the 4 episodes, we follow a young boy, Jamie, who's arrested on suspicion of murder. It immediately messes with our sense of innocence and expectation as the boy looks far too young and far too innocuous to have committed something like this. The whole family is thrown into turmoil as the arrest has come as a huge shock. We follow his journey as he's taken to a police station and questioned, and it becomes clear very quickly that he may actually have committed this crime. The police have CCTV footage of the attack and have linked it with Jamie. In episode 2, we see the 2 police officers who arrested the young boy enter his school to see if they can find any further information about a motive or a weapon. At the school, we see the toll the murder has taken on some of the pupils, and also the environment that Jamie has been exposed to for a large part of his life. The pupils are basically out of control, and no amount of allowed discipline seems to make a difference. The children are reckless, rude, and show no respect to the police officers or the teachers. In the 3rd episode, we see Jamie having an interview with an independent assessor who needs to submit a character assessment to the court for his trial. This may have been my favourite episode of the series, even though on a technical level it wasn't as complex as the other episodes. I felt on a character level it went the deepest, and this was the episode that I realised that this boy is an incredible actor. It takes place a few weeks after his arrest, and we can see that the frustration of the situation has built within him. During the interview, as he feels that he's being played or not in control of the situation anymore, his anger comes out in the most intense ways. He's clearly been in a lot of environments where if you want your way, you take it by force. And we see the assessor being intimidated by a 13-year-old boy, and she's genuinely very scared. On paper, that seems insane, but in practice, it's actually very dangerous. She's there because he's potentially capable of murder. In the 4th episode, we catch up with the family 13 months after the arrest. We learn that Jamie has not yet had his day in court and that the parents have been suffering abuse from the community. In the episode, we learn more about the family dynamic, and whilst it is taking place after the arrest, and understandably that would change their behaviours, the dynamic is pretty clear. The father's temper is volatile, and the mother feels like she has to manage her husband's emotions and minimise the damage of his explosive outbursts. The teenage daughter is extremely reluctant to share anything at all about her life with her parents and is walking on eggshells. In interviews, the writer talked about how he didn't want this to come across like it was the fault of the parents, or at least the fault of the parents alone. He wanted us to dig a little bit deeper about what potentially could make a killer. And I feel that these 4 episodes as an ensemble really dig into that. Each episode of Adolescence is shot in one take and takes place in real time. In episode 1, somebody asks how long ago the boy was arrested, and someone says around 25 minutes ago. And that is physically how long ago we as the viewer saw that happen. This is a device that director Philip Barantini has used before. He actually made the short film / feature film / TV show Boiling Point. Yes, that one story was adapted into 3 separate things, but with each one he preserved this element of following it in one shot so that you were getting a real-time account of what it was like to be in the kitchen. And I think that this style of filmmaking, the one shot, gives a sense of urgency. It makes you feel like you are in the moment with the characters. It also helps to direct your focus in an ensemble cast. So if you think about all the different characters involved in Jamie's arrest, all the different people involved in running a kitchen, basically within one moment, you can take a look at what each person is doing, and that tells you something about who they are. There's a piece of writing advice often attributed to Anton Chekhov that goes, "Don't tell me the moon is shining, show me the glint of light on broken glass." Which is a way of saying, show me the small details in order to convey the impact of the bigger force. Similarly, there's a quote attributed to Mikhail Sholokhov, the Russian novelist, which roughly translates as, "Don't write about the big battles, write about the small things. A child's shoes left on the battlefield." Again, this digs into the show don't tell principle, one of the biggest rules in cinema and other visual media. With Adolescence, each episode being shot in real time as a one take means that you're forced to look into the smaller detail rather than stitching together bigger moments that have happened across a larger period of time. And it also encourages people to be glued to the screen, something that actually is kind of unusual for Netflix. I made a video last year because it had become widely known that Netflix were encouraging projects to be made that were purposefully meant to be played in the background whilst you're looking at your phone. There were accounts from people who worked on shows and films for Netflix who'd been told their writing wasn't second screen enough and that characters needed to repeat dialogue and not do anything to take the viewer's attention away from their phone. And I think most people agree that that's an absolutely insane way to make visually led media. And it felt like Netflix was steering into the laziest way that people engage with media. And they were acknowledging if people want to look at their phone, we'll give something for them to have in the background, as long as they don't turn off. And I'm really glad that Adolescence is a swing in the total opposite direction. Because if you're making media that you don't expect people to be engaged by, they're never going to be engaged by it. And they're going to start walking away from that platform because they don't need it on in the background. Pulling off a one shot is so difficult, and the amount of effort that has gone into this is insane. Imagine if you were on the 55th minute of shooting and someone falls over, or they get their line wrong, or they spill a drink, and it's not meant to be there, so you have to start again. And Adolescence managed to do all of that in a way that felt right for the story and didn't feel like a gimmick. It's wonderful to hear that that part of it has enhanced the story, and it's making people want to physically look at their screen and take in the media that they decided to put on. By focusing on one incident and allowing us to unpack it in great detail, Adolescence allows us to very thoroughly examine the issue at its core, which is the disenfranchisement of young men. Jamie has a triangle of influence that includes a dangerous online culture, a hierarchical social system in place at school, and a family dynamic dominated by aggression. With the online influence, the show doesn't delve too much into the details of incel culture. We really just get a name, a mention, and a statistic that's brought up a couple of times. The statistic that some of the children at Jamie's school believe is that 80% of women are attracted to 20% of men. This is something in the real world that people float about online. It's completely unsupported by evidence, but if you can imagine that if you're feeling insecure and you're at an age where everyone seems to have a love life except for you, you might feel reassured by something like this because it basically tells you it's not your fault, the system is against you. There are a couple of films that I know of that have tried to tackle incel culture, or at least say they have. The word incel is a portmanteau of the words involuntary and celibate, so an incel is involuntarily celibate. Their identity entirely comes from the fact that they do not have female attention. A couple of years ago, when the film Don't Worry Darling was on its calamitous press tour, director Olivia Wilde claimed the film tackled incel culture. So an incel's identity comes from their lack of female companionship. But in the film Don't Worry Darling, all of the men that Olivia said were inspired by incels had wives. Every single one of them. Similarly, John Trengove's Manodrome was marketed with the explicit purpose of challenging incel culture. The film follows a man in his late 20s, joining a club of men whose aims are to empower men again and harness their inner power. And I think that it did have some strong moments of the dangers of aligning with a group like this and prioritising aggression and power. But again, in this scenario, we were following a character who has a pregnant girlfriend. Directly the opposite of an incel's experience. I feel like both of those films brought the terminology into their marketing campaign after the films had been made. And they may have thought that, oh, we want to get in on this buzzword that people are writing about at the moment, so let's just say that it addresses incel culture. But neither of those films fundamentally portrayed the background of the type of people that get involved in incel culture and the way that that world can engulf you. For me, another strength of Adolescence was in the moments where it wasn't addressing what had happened. In the final episode, we followed the family 13 months after the arrest, and they're not coping well. Despite their best efforts, they really have not come to terms with the actions of their son, and they are very much suppressing how they feel about it. You can tell the experience has been traumatic for each individual in the family, and so it's fair that it's not something they're ready to talk about at all times. But even in moments where it is appropriate to talk about it and almost necessary to talk about it, such as when Jamie calls from the juvenile detention centre, the family still find it hard to talk about the situation. And in the moments where they're trying to cheer each other up and save the day, they reveal how they deal with their emotions. There are two stories in the final episode that deal with humiliation. The first is about how the mum and dad met. And it's a situation where the dad slightly humiliated himself, but the mum found it endearing and eventually they ended up getting together. The other is a story where Jamie's dad took him to the football when he was younger and encouraged him to play. But he was so bad that Jamie's dad felt humiliated because his son didn't live up to the masculine stereotype that he'd hoped. I think this is a really interesting comparison on how we process humiliation. When the dad was humiliated as a teen, his love interest found it endearing and she was empathetic towards his vulnerability, and it even led to them being married. But when Jamie was bad at football, that humiliated not him, but his dad. And his dad internalised that feeling and made it feel like he had somehow failed. So for this next part of the video, I filmed myself talking about a Jon Ronson quote, but I accidentally got the books mixed up. The quote is in fact from So You've Been Publicly Shamed, and I said that it was from The Psychopath Test, but both of these books are amazing and you should read them. But I'm going to jump into the quote from So You've Been Publicly Shamed because in it, Jon Ronson explores the psychology behind murderers and people who've been imprisoned for extremely serious crimes. Universal amongst the violent criminals was the fact that they were keeping a secret. A central secret, and that secret was that they felt ashamed. Deeply ashamed, chronically ashamed, acutely ashamed. It was shame every time. I have yet to see a serious act of violence that was not provoked by the experience of feeling shamed or humiliated, disrespected and ridiculed. And there's a saying that has come about from this exploration, which is all violence is a person's attempt to replace shame with self-esteem. And I also used to listen to a lot of Brené Brown, and she would talk a lot about where shame comes from. And to her, shame is unwanted identity. And I think if you combine all of these things together, that's definitely something that comes out in adolescence. Adolescence, in a way, explores how we deal with our own shame and how we assign shame to others. It's absolutely insane for 13-year-olds to feel humiliated at being involuntarily celibate. But without the emotional maturity to understand that, or the experience in life to come to terms with things that you're upset about, you can understand why finding something to blame and finding something that tells you it's not you, it's everyone else, can be extremely alluring. And for me, this is why Adolescence has really struck a nerve with people. We're now examining how it feels to be a young person in this day and age. The conversation has gone in some really wild places. There are calls for social media to take responsibility, and to be honest, given everything that's happened in that space over the last few years and the revelations that they know that their platforms are damaging to teenage brains, that might be something that somebody has to explore. But fundamentally, we are not equipped to deal with this. We have never lived through having all of this information and all of this misinformation out there in the world before. But as the parents come to the realization in adolescence that potentially they could have done more for their son, maybe we could do more for the people around us. So adolescence has sparked a very big conversation that I, as a filmmaker, am finding way bigger and deeper than what I can emotionally handle as well. But I think that at the very least, it has got us all thinking about how we would not want for this direction to continue, and that in fact, we should be taking a look at the journey and going, how do we stop this from getting any worse? Thank you for watching today, and please let me know your thoughts in the comments. It's absolutely fine to disagree, but let's try and keep it a constructive place. I'll see you next time.